You've talked a lot about the figure of 6 million Jews being killed. Another way to look at it is that that 6 million represents 1 out of every 3 Jews in the world murdered during the Holocaust. Now, again, there were other people who suffered during World War II, and there are other examples of atrocities since the war. I'm sure you're familiar with them. The atrocity in Biafra, in Cambodia, Ethiopia. Maybe in the course of this class there's been reference to the tragedy of the Armenians, who lost about half of their numbers during war at the hands of the Turks. There was the destruction of the Russian peasants in the Ukrainian peasants to be exact, by Stalin. May have numbered in the millions, very perhaps similar to the numbers of Jews that were killed by Hitler. And yet, even when we look at that, we can make certain distinctions in terms of the Jewish tragedy that was the Holocaust during World War II. For it is only in the case of the Jewish Holocaust that we have the international nature of the episode. We can say that the Holocaust occurred in 20 different countries. These other catastrophes occurred in one country. Doesn't, again, not to minimize the meaning, but there is something different, I think, when a state, Germany in this case, it's 20 different countries and puts a minority group to death in each of those countries. Also, something I'm sure you must have soldiers who were killed in battle. The first Memorial Day, though, for the Holocaust victims, and that's to mark the memory of the 6 million. Now, in both cases, during the day, a very loud siren goes off in cities throughout the country at the same time. You don't know at what time of the day that's going to be. And everybody stops and observes 2 full minutes of silence. Even if you're driving your car through the street, the car stops. Atom bomb. It really was something that caused people to gasp. But then he concluded by saying, if the Jews of Eastern Europe in the 1930s had had 5,000 tanks and maybe a little atom bomb, they would have been alive. This, I think, is the way to understand the Israeli psyche, the way it deals with Holocaust. Now, just by way of that, of course, I've stressed the particular Jewish tragedy today in this talk. We've talked about individual countries, what use the Holocaust can be put. Most of the things we've mentioned have been political uses. The question I want to conclude with is, how ought it to be put? How can we make it more universal without denying the specific Jewish tragedy? What lessons can, above all, a visionistic purification, an ultimate sacrifice? I think it's very important to think about that. I'm still working it out in my own mind, but I believe that to bear witness to one Holocaust is really to try to prevent a second one. And that's the area where it would lie. In fact, if there ever is a nuclear war, the Holocaust danger compared to a hopeless genocidal scream of what nuclear confrontation would be. Thank you very much. Okay, we left some time for questions, not as much as I would have liked, but we still have some time, and I'd really like to, I know I covered a lot of ground. I can go into any... Right. Okay, let's ask about these, and that's a very interesting case. And again, that's an example of something for many years there wasn't much written about that.
There still isn't.
There still isn't, right. I know that they suffered a great deal. There was a gypsy camp in Auschwitz that saw some of the worst atrocities of all, even in the context of Auschwitz. But the Nazis never had the same single-minded purpose of destroying the gypsies as they did to the Jews. Within Nazi ideology, they differ. Final answer to that question. Yeah.
Don't you think that the reason that is, you mentioned the threat that the Jews pose as opposed to the gypsies?
Yeah.
But just from what little reading I've done on the gypsies, it seems that there was just as much hatred from the Germans directed at the gypsies, but they weren't as powerful of a propaganda tool because no one liked the gypsies. Everyone could just as easily, even the Jews maybe wouldn't mind the feeling I get from what I've been reading, and that the Germans did away with them, but didn't have to publicize it in the way they did. They had to justify what they were doing to the Jews as being, the Jews are a threat to our society, we need to get rid of them, but with the gypsies it was, let's just get rid of them while we're sweeping up the country in Eastern Europe as well.
I don't know, I have to think about, I'm not sure. Again, this is something where, we really need is a comparative study, and we need something to really look at this more carefully. I do want to mention something that Wiesel mentioned to me just in a talk we had a few years ago. I was very surprised. I asked him about the gypsies because he was himself in the camps. I was very surprised that a great humanitarian like Elie Wiesel said to me, "Don't talk to me about the gypsies. I saw them." I was shocked that a man like him would say that. So it's something that from then on I really want to, decided I really needed to learn more about that. But again, we're still, I think, waiting for the monographs on that.
Do you think there will be a trend of more study and research done on gypsies? I mean, it's going to be
I think so. I think
soon.
these are things that are happening. I mean, it seems almost every year an important book comes out that really is the definitive study of one of the Holocaust studies. And I think that will, I'm almost certain that that will emerge. Yeah.
I was wondering what you think might happen to the study of the Holocaust in another couple of generations due to low birth rate and intermarriage issues.
Well, I'm concerned, maybe not so much for those reasons, but I'm concerned for other reasons. I think it's just going to be in another 2 or 3 decades that there won't be any survivors around anymore. I think that always makes it, becomes part of the Jewish liturgy, for example. If it's marked by communities like the Yom HaShoah that we have, I know that it's marked here in Sonoma. It is in most Jewish communities now. If it becomes part of the consciousness, both of the American community and the Jewish, specifically Jewish American community, I think then there's a chance that it will be remembered. But I share the concern that you have. As a child of survivors myself, I certainly wouldn't want this to be, in another couple of years, perhaps when an old man, that this be referred to as something like the Napoleonic Wars, something that's just not that important. It'll always be important to me. And I would hope, though, that we can avoid that minimizing of it. I wouldn't be so sanguine, though, if I were looking at Europe. I think in Europe it will be forgotten, if not denied. And I feel really bad about that. In Europe itself, the actual scene of the crime. In fact, the niece of the woman who's being beatified lives in Santa Rosa, and I was privileged to have lunch in her house just a few weeks ago. And she explained to me her own ambivalent feelings about going to Cologne and participating in the ceremony with the Pope, because she is an observant Jew, and she felt that this might be inappropriate. I wasn't sure about what to say to her at that time. So I want to mention, though, that what I would have in the negative sense would be this, that, again, coming back to much of what I've been discussing today, I believe that there was a specific Jewish tragedy in terms of the Holocaust. Yes, millions of Catholics were killed in the Holocaust, during World War II, no question. 3 million Polish Catholics were killed. But the Polish nation continued. The Catholic Church is very strong in Europe, and it continues. For the Jews, there's no continuation. 1,000 years of Jewish history in Europe was terminated with the Holocaust. We do not exist there anymore. I believe the only thing we can have left is memory. And to stress the Catholics of Auschwitz is, I think, to risk distorting the story. Vatican Secretary of State and cabled back to Berlin, it's okay, they're not going to make any trouble. We have that on file in the diplomatic record. They only opened these archives a few years ago, but we have that. Now, you see how hard it is for me today to see the Pope making a saint out of a Catholic victim of Auschwitz as a Catholic? It's a problem. Again, I'm not speaking with 100% conviction. I could hardly get to Jerusalem and back without causing a tremendous controversy. And that was just visiting Jerusalem. I think that in many, many ways, Israel marks, the redemption here. You have the murder of the 6, even within a Christian sense now, thinking in terms of Christian theology. You have this terrible suffering, you have this murder of the 6 million, but then you have, after the war, the creation of this new fledgling country that's struggling for its existence. This should be some Christian theology here, but along those lines, it could be a perfect opportunity to recognize Israel. So, yes, he may be trying to say that he has regrets and about what his predecessor failed to do, but I think there would be more appropriate ways of showing it. Yeah.
There were 2 points that I think were mentioned very briefly in this entire series that I think need reinforcing. One is that the Jews were killed not because of their religion.
Grip. And then the invasion of Russia in 41. The number of German Jews killed in the Holocaust is actually somewhere around 150,000 to 200,000, somewhere in there, even less. So that's a good point. I'd assume that people would know that. In terms of the racism, you're absolutely right. That's perhaps not as well known, but you're absolutely right. If you were born Jewish and you not only can 12, in any case, it is racial, and I want to take this opportunity to mention an outstanding book that I just came out a couple of months ago. I just read it about a month ago, that deals with trying to understand this phenomenal hatred of the Jews that could lead to Auschwitz, and could lead to them considering the Jews a gangrenous appendix that would have to be removed. He interviewed them. The title is The Nazi Doctors by Robert J. Lifton. And he explains the very strong hold of ideology that they literally believed in this racism, which had seeped into German medical schools and all of German intellectual consciousness even before Hitler. And some of them actually said, well, it was unpleasant working at Auschwitz and performing these medical experiments and sending people to the ghetto. It was unpleasant. We didn't like it. We didn't care for it. But it was necessary, and we felt that we were cleansing the race and so on. They said that in the 1980s. This book, in tremendous detail, goes into the mind of the SS doctor, the way that in the guise of healing, there would actually be killing going on. And I think that, to get to your point about racism, this explains how this could have been educated people. Okay, I think we have time for just a very... Yeah, go ahead.
What is the Vatican stand on why they do not accept the State of Israel, why they don't recognize it?
They claim that it's... what do they claim, or why do they really not do it?
Well, both.
Okay, they claim that it's all not settled yet, that there's not peace. When peace comes, then they'll recognize it.
Isn't it the issue of Jerusalem?
Yeah, the real issue is lands in the holy places, and it becomes a theological issue.
Well, I just was wondering if the church thought they were the true new Israel versus that's the old Israel, that's the Old Testament, Old Covenant.
Certainly part of it, but although some Christian philosophers take issue with that, and say that it's not the case. That's part of it. Certainly the holy places, who's going to be in charge of that? I think psychologically they may have a problem with a Jewish people, a Jewish nation that's not just a theological construct, but that's a real living, breathing country with an army and borders. I don't think they're really accepting that. Yeah.
About the point that you made in trying to explain mostly the Netherlands or Western Europe reaction to Israel, and you went into a deep psychological explanation how they would justify their not hiding or hiding Jews, the bully.
There were these kinds of analogies drawn in papers like Le Monde, the outstanding paper in Paris that should have known better. In other words, what I'm saying is that one found these analogies not so much in the streets among the common men, but among intellectuals, among very well-informed people. So that's put me on the track of trying to search for a deeper answer. But I appreciate your comment. I think that's also something that has to be taken into account. Yeah, I think you had something.
You say in Auschwitz the monuments and the memorials are not substantial enough, and that I'd like to hear maybe from some Auschwitz survivors here who have returned to Auschwitz, if it seems adequate to you as a survivor, that maybe Bernard can answer this, I don't know. You've been back to Auschwitz, and is there a Jewish element there? I read Samuel Ulmer's book, and he mentions the Jewish faces are missing.
Anti-Semitism. Aryan supremacy, included a lot of groups, including the Jews, but anti-Semitism remained still there. And
I know,
if
but...
anything, it's even more virulent I suspect, in the absence of a viable Jewish culture.
Yeah. Well, remember, I was talking not only about Poland, I was talking about Holland. I was talking about one of the most liberal and enlightened places known for toleration, to have run literally in the Anne Frank house, or almost in the Anne Frank Foundation. Kind of vicious propaganda was what was disturbing. But you're right. In Europe in general, there is a strain of anti-Semitism that's very, very deep. Well, I think we'll have to end it there. And again, I'm glad I could come up and talk to you. All right, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Who has traveled extensively in Europe.
I'm the child of survivors. From the time that I grew up in New York, I felt this was one of the most important subjects that I could be studying. And I went with that purpose to the university. And as I've been able to spend my academic life in this field, I find that it's also a way to study not only the destruction of the Jews in Europe, but feeling on the facts are so horrible that it's a question of not only people being killed, but killed in the worst possible way, degraded, humiliated, even used for medical experiments. That naturally we can understand human nature of people who say they just would rather spend their time thinking about other things. But what I always say to that is that other people had to go through it. So I say to anyone who has doubts, at least, I think that many of the European countries, a country like France, say, I think there was ingrained anti-Semitism, a great deal of opportunism, those who wanted to cooperate with the Nazis for their own gain, their own advantage. I think in Eastern Europe there was a great deal of racial hatred of the Jews, rivaling that of the Nazis themselves. I think in the United States it was something else again, more political opportunism.
To
People. In the camps, the Nazi doctors looked at the Jews as just human material, and therefore they could be experimented on medically. They were doomed anyway. An image would be of the commandant of Auschwitz would be the director of a dog pound, where many of the animals are slated for extermination and anything can be done to them. So that, yes, I think that is actually a helpful image to understand the attitude toward the Jews.
and the extermination process survivors who escaped Auschwitz. This evidence was presented by the Jewish leadership to the Allies, including Roosevelt and the British people, for them, and they were pleaded with them to bomb the rail lines and the gas chambers in Auschwitz. Yet the Allies refused to do it. Why do you think this was so?
This is something that I've thought about a great deal. I think I would rely on the work by David Wyman, two Protestant ministers who wrote a very important book about 3 or 4 years ago entitled The Abandonment of the Jews. In that book, he deals with many of the reasons for this policy. What he finally comes down to is the feeling on the part of the Roosevelt administration that politically it would do them no good, within the framework of American politics, to look like they were going out of their way to help Jews. This is because at that time...
I was in Auschwitz, and when I returned there in 1981, I discovered pictures, aerial photographs taken by American bombers. 1943, 44 is when they were taken, of the whole complex of the factories around the Auschwitz and the crematoria and Birkenau. Yet, so that from Bruna, the factories they were bombing was 2 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they refused to drop bombs on the extermination. They didn't want to hurt people.
That's right. That's right. And we know also that the skies were very clear in the summer of 1944. The Allied planes controlled the air. We know that Auschwitz was a very visible target. The chimney alone was very high and very visible.
And we know, as you say, that they actually bombed oil refineries, and yet they never bombed Auschwitz. I might also add, they never bombed the railroad tracks leading to Auschwitz either.
Right. The next question is one of what was the nature of language and the language that was used by the Germans to disguise their acts of extermination? They had all these names.
Yes, that's very true. I think that's what racism does, and we certainly see this in studying the Holocaust.
I thank you very much for being here at Sonoma State University.
Great. Well, I'm glad to be here, and I feel honored and also a little humble to be in the presence of a survivor. So I hope that whatever I could contribute is be helpful.
Before you
One of the things came up here, the role of the United States, as you did, and nobody asked about a number of the other things about which we spoke, why they didn't bomb Auschwitz and so on. So that would have been something that could have come up. I'm glad we had a chance to deal with it here. But there are so many historical problems when one looks at the Holocaust. Such a vast field, so much really to be covered and to be thought about. I suppose I would have, I expected something a little more on the personalities of the perpetrators, the different psychological types into which they fall, the sadist like a Klaus Barbie, the bureaucrat like an Adolf Eichmann, the ideologue like so many of these Nazi doctors. Would have thought that people might have asked a little bit more about the personalities, particularly since a number of these people are on trial or have been on trial. What I would answer